I've spent the last 2.5 years, probably 2+ years, asking one question at almost every conference and event I go to, and no one can give me a cogent answer. Has anyone solved the ability to take like a large language model and actually securely enable it so that you can run it in your environment in production and have it communicate with the open web, right? To harness the power of all that open web data like GPT lets you do. No one has yet to give me an answer I could actually work with.
Thanks for listening to another episode of The Future of Data Security. Today I'm joined by George Al-Koura, CISO at Ruby, and also Principal Security Advisor at Sabala. George, it's good to see you again. Thanks for coming on.
John, my friend, and thank you for having me on your show.
All right. Maybe to get started, I'd love for you to talk about your experience from the military, because it's a secret, but we were both at RMC together and learned a lot of tricks there. Then you went on to serve in signals intelligence, and I'm really curious how these experiences have shaped your way into security today and the role that you have at Ruby.
Well, I mean, we had the good fortune of going to the Royal Military College, which has a very distinct, unique way of educating its graduates. They have a very disciplined approach, but they also have a very balanced approach. So for myself as a student who was an arts student, I was a politics psychology student, we still had to do science courses, and the science students had to do the arts courses as well, which I think provides us with a certain degree of intellectual balance and flexibility mentally, which allows us to be very adaptable in different situations, leading into going into the SIGINT world where, as a Middle East, North Africa specialist, we dealt with all sorts of different problems, especially in the, heyday of Al-Qaeda, and then when Al-Qaeda became Daesh, and then, going from operations in Syria to the Sinai Peninsula and Kuwait with Op Impact, and then a little bit of Mali, you're dealing with different languages, different cultures, different tribes. All this type of work requires very fast mental flexibility and requires the ability to make accurate assessments and analysis to make correct decisions. And I think that's ultimately the value of what RMC and the military provides, is the decisiveness and the leadership to actually be put in the high pressure positions to perform. And again, we went to a high performance school. Like, I'm in my sports, my personal life, like I did competitive fighting for a long time. I still kind of do. I played high level football, rugby, I did wrestling. All these things require a certain level of high performance ability. And I think if you have that kind of mindset, if you have that kind of approach and attitude, the military is a place to thrive, and it teaches you how to take it to the max. So then when you go into your post-military career, I think, better than anyone else who comes straight from Civvy Street, you're more equipped to succeed quickly. Like, brother, I went from junior analyst at a major global SOC to director at the oldest military defense firm in the country in 3.5 years. I ran all the managed services there and became the CISO the next year. This type of career escalation at this rate is next to unheard of in cybersecurity. But if you talk to people who succeeded in the military and then they found a path in the commercial space, it's pretty common.
I think it's very interesting. A lot of people went through RMC and these experiences, and they only realized later the value of all this training and the exposure that they had to, frankly, really stressful situations. Talking about that, are there any specific stories? I had a mentor when I started this that said, Jean, it's war out there all the time in cyber. And I think nowadays, more than ever, it's not the military that's protecting our nation from cyber. It's every organization that's responsible for their own networks, critical infrastructure. Any thoughts on that, and any stories as you went through the transition that might have shaped the way you approach things today?
I think there were a lot, because when I left the Army, I should say, I didn't really know like what I wanted to do. I just knew my time serving in the Reg Force was done, right? So at that time, the programs for transition from Reg Force and Civvy Street were not quite as robust or mature, which is to say they just drop you on your ass. You got to figure it out. So, I started a couple different startups making some janky applications, like a drinking game app that I sold to some bars for ad space. I did a small staffing startup where I had a little racket where I knew of a training company that needed people who were Microsoft specialists, and I knew that people were specialists. So I made some money contracting, but none of these things really became an enterprise. It was just stuff to pay the bills. But at a certain point, I got a shot to actually work in a SOC as part of a team, but I'd never done cyber before, really. I understood security, and I think the ultimate value that the Army gave me was that it taught me security and it taught me security operations as a theoretical concept. Whether you're doing physical security, whether you're doing signals intelligence, whether you're doing cybersecurity, security is still security, right? And so the principles of running an operation, leading a team, having KPIs, delivering on results, those are all the same, and everything is still based on discipline, still based on routine. So the things that I learned in SIGINT that made me good at SIGINT are the things that I built my cyber career off of. So using bottom line upfront reporting, having the ability to do cogent analysis and provide leadership support in a consumable manner. So I could take very complex material, like in cybersecurity, you deal with complex information, and you have to bake it down into something that usually non-technical decision makers can consume quickly and make really substantial decisions based off of. And there's a lot of pressure that comes with that, right? The Army teaches you how to go through that. This is just very high level, but it kind of like captures what the logic has to be. And then cybersecurity, it's the exact same logic. These are all risk-based instructions. We are in the business of risk management here.
I think it's very interesting. And the more I think about it, fundamentally, it's really the case where conflict, which the military excels at, is overflowing in the lives of everyone with cyber. And I think a lot of veterans do really well in that space. And you've articulated some of the benefits so well. I remember myself, I had a boss, he was notorious for, if you send me an email and it doesn't start with bottom line up front, there's only one thing that's going to happen: delete. And so these are things, you know, in a chaotic, complex environment that are worth a lot in terms of getting to a resolution.
Yeah.
Talking about the topic we're really here to discuss, I'm interested in what you see are the biggest challenges right now in data security. Is there anything so different about 2025, or are we just doing the same things better, faster, meaner?
I think the biggest ultimate challenge at a whole of industry level is in the SMB space, is getting organizations to invest specifically in data security beyond the compliance standards that they're imposed upon. It's not just because, you're dealing with a regulation that you have to provide X amount of GRC, or GRC being government's risk and compliance. Like you have to look at how you actually manage your data. But to look at how you manage your data, you have to know what your data is, know where it is, know how to classify it. A lot of organizations, especially if they are founded by startup founders who don't have experience in tech or don't have this kind of knowledge, they don't know really how to think about the problem, and they don't even know really that the problem exists until someone comes up to them and says, "Hey, we found an entire repo with a bunch of your credentials exposed. So what do you want to do about it?" And if you've never thought about data privacy, if you've never thought about securing your infrastructure at a data level, you're kind of up a creek without a paddle. So now we've reached a point where the nature of the threat actors are so prevalent and the point of entry is so low. Like before, it was just script kiddies would just, buy simple scripts or buy ransomware as a service. Now there's platformization. Now there are organizations in the threat actor space that are more robust, more mature than, actual corporations. I know of some organizations I've read about, especially in India, and some of them in Europe. They have better HR programs than we do in North America, and they're the bad guys. Right? This is what we're dealing with. These people are organized, they're intelligent. We cannot any longer stop treating data privacy and data security as an afterthought. And again, it goes back to ultimately the bigger problem with just security in general being looked upon as a cost center. It has to be looked upon as a business enabler. I think the attitude is slowly starting to change because people are understanding now that the CIA triad, right, that confidentiality, that integrity, that availability, it really is the core of everything that we do from a cybersecurity standpoint. And if you don't apply that importance to your data as well, then you lose access to the data in its most critical moments because you're going to get pwned.
I thought about this a lot, and it's true that a lot of organizations, especially SMBs, don't have the priorities to do that, may not have the means. But also, cybersecurity is kind of a free crime. You could do that in your basement across the world, and there's nothing that's going to happen to you. Do you think that there's a part of resolving that issue that ties to really government cracking down on this so it's no longer a free crime? Because I'm sure if you walk down the street with your girlfriend, somebody spits in her face, it's not a free crime. And that's why it doesn't happen, right? Any thoughts on that and, the role of government in this whole problem?
My honest opinion of it is that government needs to play a much bigger role. In fact, government needs to lead. But the problem is we are in a democratic system where the people who are leading government, from the day they get elected, the next day they're starting their reelection campaign. So until cybersecurity becomes an issue that people win and lose elections over, we're not going to be taken seriously to the level that people in the industry know we need to be taken.
Hmm.
Like we should have, for example, like a proper cyber SAR. We should have someone who, and I've said this before publicly, like an individual who is working for our government, who's authorized by our government at the EX level, and maybe they come from industry, maybe they come from career civil service, but there has to be someone there who is the head of a agency that has direct oversight over cybersecurity standards and operations throughout the country. And that includes an entire digital supply chain, right? There's a critical infrastructure supply chain where if you are on like the supplier list for the government, like you should be regulated. You should have certain standards in place, and they're working on that. I know we have our own CMMC that we're about to implement or might be implemented already. I know there was the Can Cyber Secure program that they've also brought in place for a lot of smaller businesses. And that needs a little bit more support and robust maturity, but at least it's there. There's an effort there. But I still see that, cybersecurity at the whole of economy level across our entire national digital supply chain, it's not there. We don't have a unified approach. We don't have someone who is providing the direct leadership and with the designated authority from our elected officials with understanding of what the problem statements are. We don't have that in place. And I think that lack of leadership is just going to make it impossible to regulate against properly and to protect. You have to have proper strategic vision at the whole of government level to do what you're talking about. And that is making cybercrime a real crime. Like it is a real crime, but it's not that you can't be the founder of Silk Road and you're the guy that gets arrested and like you're the 1%. We have to talk about the
Hmm.
other 99% of people doing illegal things. And if you talk to most LEO, I know what they say in public, and I love our police forces. They do a great job. But if you talk to them privately, they're like, man, we can't do anything about it. If you tell them, hey, we got pwned, or my grandma's life savings when cryptocurrency got pwned, the cops are going to tell you, well, sorry.
Yeah, I think there needs to be an adjustment there. And even in the world of real physical crimes, robberies, and things like that, often nothing is done. So it's a big problem for sure. Talking about programs, you've run very successful programs at Ruby and other organizations for clientele through SIBA. What do you think about a successful data security and privacy program? What are the must-haves? What are the gotchas?
The biggest thing, obviously, you have to have your people, process, and technology in place, right? So there has to be leadership. There has to be delegated leadership that is recognized by the entire organization of being the people responsible and accountable for results. So your RACI from a data security standpoint has to be in place. I think, having a CPO is really important. There aren't enough organizations without a CPO. And there are not enough organizations, even though the trend is changing, you need more CISOs or you need a delegated individual who's in charge of information security at your organization. And for some organizations who have a brick and mortar element or they have like controlled office sites, that CISO is also reporting into a CSO, or maybe it's a CSO who's in charge of everything. But the point is there's someone in charge of it who's accountable. And then you have to have teams of individuals at least who can do the integration and operationalization of what comes down from a policy or directive standpoint, be it from the board, from the C-suite, or from the actual leaders in charge functionally. I think if you don't get the investment necessary to also get the right technologies in place, right? Because again, if you're dealing with data, you're dealing with tech. If you keep cheaping out your budget on tech, how can you run an effective data security program? Right? That's the issue. So I think, at a board level, a big part of the problem is, or a part of the solution, I should say, is educating your board or having people on your board who understand the data security problem and are willing to invest in that part of the business to make sure that continuity is there and that customer service and customer support, be it government or be it open customers, that their data is being prioritized as like a crown jewel. And again, like beyond having the teams, beyond having the tech, beyond having the process, there also has to be, the willingness to invest in third party review. Because you can do something, you can build a great program and you know that you're good, so you have to have someone come in and actually poke holes in that and run audits. Auditing is a very critical and important part of running an effective program, be it the internal audits and the external audits, beyond just for certification standards. If you aren't investing in having penetration testing, if you aren't investing in having external auditing and third-party reporting, like gray and black box type testing, you are leaving your program extremely exploitable because you are just admiring like the beauty of your own ideas and efforts. So I think that's kind of like at a high level, the core components that have to be in place.
You work with a lot of clients and you mentioned the board. Speaking with a lot of CISOs, like it's a big ordeal to get funding. They have to develop very strong business cases. Do you think that there's a big gap there, a lot more work to do on boards so that instead of having to go beg on your knees for required funding, it could be just, hey, what are we doing as a team to shore up our data security to make sure we have all the right investments in place? What are you seeing?
I'm seeing a slow but gradual shift in the right direction because now boards understand that cybersecurity is a board level problem. I think for years it wasn't looked upon that way, especially when, different organizations, depending on how they were configured, cyber might be under the CFO, it might be under the CIO, it might be under the CRO. There was never actually the precedence that needed to be placed on cybersecurity at the corporate operational level. So the board, it puts CISOs in a very difficult position because the CISO gets all the accountability dumped on them, but none of the empowerment necessary at the senior executive level to actually protect their part of the business. And their part of the business, unfortunately, is everyone's part of the business. I think boards are starting to recognize that issue and they're starting to bring in folks who actually have solid data or infrastructure security backgrounds so that they're able to provide the right guidance, to pull in the right organization. So if their corporate leadership doesn't have the networks, those board members, like, let's look at what the function of a board person does. Like, and not to do the Rotman ICD.D or CIO.D thing, but like, as a board member, it's not just strategic advisory based on your experience, it's your network, right? Like anything else in our industry, your network is your power. So if your corporate leadership team doesn't know who to turn to, or they're way too overwhelmed with other stuff to do it, you as a board member, why you make your fancy money or your equity or whatever it is, you have like the background to call up the CEOs of this or that company and you know that they have the right technology for this use case specifically, even if none of your corporate leadership do. You can go to the CEO or you can go to the CIO or the CISO and be like, look, we know there's a bit of an issue right now based on your last quarterly report, based on your presentation. We think that you should look into these individuals. And if you would like, we will foster introductions to you. And we'd like you to look into their technologies because they might be able to help you out. I think, boards need to take a much more hands-on approach. If they're going to also take the EBITDA, they have to take the leadership necessary to help their corporate teams actually achieve the right standards of data and security protection.
I agree with you. One other thing I wanted to cover is I'm certainly looking at different things in the market and I'm seeing data security and privacy merging together, where previously they were separate. And I would say privacy was probably the poor child of that equation. Maybe coming together into some sort of data centric risk management framework. Are you seeing the same thing? What is your provision for these two functions?
Well, again, I'm lucky in both of my organizations because privacy is a major part of both of them, right? So from where I sit in my subjective perspective, privacy is privacy is part of the driver that justifies investment in security, right? So when there's legitimate privacy risk, when the business's reputation or functionality is dependent on having a strong privacy program, that then drives the conversation to get security investment into mature a security program. And you have to frame it like that when you're talking to your CEO and you're talking to your board. This is where, security leadership or the folks who are, whether it's a CIO or whatever, who are in charge, they have to look at the privacy problem because especially if you're in an organization where your customer is either the government or your customer is the general public, your reputation on how you handle data privacy and security is really going to predicate the success of your business. And if you can't articulate that problem statement at the board level in those terms, then you'll never get the investment necessary to invest in the right technology, to get the right personnel, and to train your people in how to do the right processes to keep yourself and your data private and secure.
I think you're bang on, and it goes back to leadership. Can you have the leadership and the ability to properly articulate these needs to get the right level of funding? Any wild stories, anecdotes in the world of data security you want to share? Nothing too crazy, but
From a data security standpoint, it's kind of a threat actor story, and I have to respect because of the nature of where I work. I could tell you some really cool stories, but then I lose my job because I deal with a lot of sensitive.
don't lose your job over no
sensitive
names,
shit.
no specifics.
But I could tell you this story. So when I worked at my previous employer, I actually repelled an attack that was sourced from Russia by one of their most prevalent military cybercrime, well, not cybercrime, military cyber offensive organizations. So I stopped an attack by Fancy Fair, the good old APT-32. And they were running everything. It was like they were using a DDoS to mimic what had actually been a business email compromise, which is turning into ransomware, which is going across our directories in the environment. I mean, thankfully we had good BCDR, but it was just like, holy shit, these guys went with a multi-phase attack. And they were going after like multiple organizations in the Canadian defense industrial sector. After we stopped this attack, like we didn't know it was them specifically. We just knew we were getting DDoSed on one hand and ransomware on the other. And a senior member in our organization who's not the most technical person clicked on the damn link. Of course, before they get to the finance director, we got to figure out what to do. Anyways, we stopped the attack, and then we get word from public safety, one of the letter agencies. They tell us like literally like 10 or 12 days later, hey, by the way, like they called us and they called me and my team in, and then they called in the executive leadership team together to tell us like it was Fancy Bear, this is what's up. This is like just before Triple CS, or it might have been like when Triple CS had just begun. Fast forward a few years later, I'm at a new shop, and this is like last summer. This is DEF CON. I had like 4.5 hours of speaking at DEF CON, everything from cloud security to threat actor management and stuff like that. It was really cool. It was fun. At the end of one of my talks, this blonde Ukrainian looking lady is waiting by herself. Like, you're a speaker and all this stuff, and you talk to people, but this lady looked really suspicious. And I was like, I don't understand like why I have a vibe about this woman. And she waits for literally everyone else to leave. And my friends are waiting at the door. And she waits to me alone. She's like, hey, can I talk to you? And I was like, yeah, what's up? Did you like to talk? And I was like, what do you think? And she's like, I thought it was a good talk. I just need to know that, or I need to let you know that I was part of that team. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, I was part of that APT that attacked you. It's like,
unbelievable. When I said it's a free crime,
it was like, so the crazy part. So now, she turned sides. Now she actually works for an American company.
Okay.
And she specializes in like threat intelligence and offensive security for that company, obviously based on her experience. And she lives in America. Like she's completely turned side. But it was just very interesting to meet in real life my adversary.
Indeed.
And that's why you go to DEF CON.
yeah, which doesn't happen that often.
No, it was really cool.
Let's talk about the dirty word, AI. It's going to change a lot of things, all jokes aside, how we do our work, how we conceive products, but also going back to your story, how people are going to conduct attacks now on organizations. Do you want to share some thoughts on that way of work, threat landscape, anything else that you see happening?
I kind of see AI driving like the two next big things, or the two next big business problem statements in cybersecurity. One is secure AI implementations. Two is secure data hosting, right? And I think those are the two biggest spaces that are lined up for growth from a serviceability standpoint within the security industry. But on the secure implementation side, all the big cloud providers are now offering up their own suites, right? Whether it's like Gemini with Google, whether it's Bedrock with AWS. But yeah, so they're all having their own offerings, and if you're hosted on their environments, like they tell you it's secure and they give you all the documentation, but you still have to go through the whole testing of anything you actually implement. And, a lot of organizations, if you're particularly sensitive about your data privacy and your intellectual property, you're still not putting anything into production, right? It's still very slow. I've spent the last 2.5 years, probably 2+ years, asking one question at almost every conference and event I go to, and no one can give me a cogent answer. Has anyone solved the ability to take a LLM, like a large language model, and actually securely enable it so that you can run it in your environment in production and have it communicate with the open web, right? To harness the power of all that open web data, like GPT lets you do, or Gronk or Claude or whatever it is. No one has yet to give me an answer I could actually work with, right? A lot of people want to sell you some shit. A lot of people want to push snake oil. A lot of people like the sound of their own voice, but no one actually has an answer that I can operationalize and use in my shops. That's where I see like a major opportunity to emerge if someone can crack that nut. Beyond that, the secure data hosting thing is a very important piece as well, because I think a lot of organizations now, particularly, in the critical infrastructure space, like they never really left the prem. They just like started hybrid clouds. But a lot of cloud organizations now, beyond the whole public-private cloud hybrid system, they're just leaving the cloud altogether, right? Because they're seeing that it's just nothing but another layer of threat vector exploitation, right? When you're on that cloud, anyone can access you, and supply chain risk becomes almost unmanageable depending on the number of suppliers you have. So if you actually have an on-premise solution where you have your own data center that's locked down, right? It's a different level of CapEx, because then you're looking at the brick and mortar site, you're looking at the servers, the rack space, you're looking at the GPUs, you're looking at the power. Power generation itself is a massive budget sinker. But if you're going to run AI technologies natively within whatever your product set is, we've reached a point now where we have to go back to the DC. And I remember like 5-6 years ago, I was like, man, everyone's talking about cloud this, cloud that, and like SaaS 2.0. But I'm like, at the end of the day, we've never talked about how we mitigate against risk exposure in the cloud. We still haven't figured that out, really, at a whole of like industry level. So for me, I always knew that the cycle would go back to the data center. But that means now we have to go back to data center based operations, and companies have to invest in those data centers, which is why now a lot of the big providers, they're setting up these massive, massive DCs all over the world. Because again, they're just going to rent out rack space like a service. They've taken advantage of it.
One thing that really struck me that was a recent development is we use many tools. We'll use Google Workspace, Confluence, and everyone added an AI layer, and nobody asked for an opt-in. Some of these system, 1 week you come into work Monday and there's an AI assistant.
Yeah.
Then I'm talking to our security. I'm like, well, is all that stuff kosher? What's going on with that? Was an assessment made? Are they keeping our data? Lo and behold, some of these providers, actually, you have to opt out of them using your data for training. So there's a big emerging risk of new AIs that are just popping into existing system without the necessary approvals. And I think this creates sort of not a third party risk, but almost like an end party risk, because everyone's adding it. Any thoughts on that? Have you seen some egregious examples?
Oh, yeah, of course. My team actually had a fulsome debate about it this morning when it comes to Google Gemini, right? Because we were noticing like, wait a minute, like we thought that we had disabled Gemini use within our environment. And then, we were testing some new software out, and we noticed that, wait a minute, Gemini's backed up again.
Same thing happened to us.
Oh, no way. Okay.
Unbeknownst to anyone.
So yeah, so now we're like figuring out like, okay, guys, what do we want to do? So we end up having this whole debate of like, we pride ourselves on being security as a business enabler. And so unfortunately with certain things like the AI things, you have to say no by default until you can review and figure it out. Well, we're reaching a point now where it's like, okay, well, if they're just going to opt in like this and they're going to not even bother with our consent, we have to now be agile enough to make these assessments and either approve them or then do the opt-out in that thing. So for my team, like we're literally the next sprint or two, we're going to go through and actually do a proper assessment of Gemini. We're going to test it ourselves. And we've opened it up to everyone across the entire team. So the SOC guys, the AppSec guys, the architecture guys, even the trust and safety guys. Like if they want to participate, anyone can participate. Because if we approve this, it gets approved across the entire organization, across all functions. And that's kind of like where you have to have a mindset shift as a security team, as a security operator. It can't just be like, no, never, blah, blah, blah. It's like, hold on, no for now. Can we take a look at it? Unfortunately, however, though, I do think it's a massive problem that the companies that we trust to host our environments, in their effort to try to bring us greater efficiency and productization, are absolutely grossly disrespecting our security and our privacy potentially.
Indeed. That opens up also the risk of shadow AI, because as you pointed out, a lot of organizations are saying, time out on this, we need to review. But some of these tools are so efficient for employees, they're just going to use it perhaps on a personal device, email stuff to themselves.
Yeah, I mean, like, look, I've had to go reach a point where it's like, let's go back to security basics and like web filtering, right? If you have corporate endpoints, like if you've had like issued laptops, right? You simply just block the domains from being allowed to be accessed, unfortunately, right? And you limit them to only authorizing like the tools that you build and the LLMs that you create and actually authorize. It's unfortunately a step I've had to take, especially when like DeepSeek became a thing, right? And like everyone wanted to get on DeepSeek, and you're like, guys, it's just honestly, it's a janky, corrupted version of OpenAI. Like, it's like, if you want to know why it's corrupted, ask it if Taiwan's a country.
Right. What happened at Tiananmen Square?
Yeah. But those are examples of things where it's like, I don't want to limit people's ability to work and be creative and experiment. But unfortunately, like, technology is moving so fast, and regulation and security standards are not moving fast enough, that the teams themselves have to solve this problem in a band-aid style solution until we can catch up enough to go through the proper review steps to have something with a little bit more permanency.
Can you share some really cool examples of real use cases where in cybersecurity operations, your teams have been using LLMs, Gen AI to do things? And I can share a quick example, very simple. Like we had a deal desk and we created a GPT that you can just talk to and say, I need a quote for 50,000 employees, this product, that, and it'll just generate the document without any mistakes and without requiring someone to painstakingly do it. It opens up the door to so many small things you can now automate. Do you have some examples in cybersecurity specifically and data security?
So I can tell you from an enterprise third-party offering standpoint, because for us, full disclosure, we're still at the phase where we're developing everything internally, so it's a bit slower. And I'm not authorizing use until we've built our own internal models and we've actually fleshed them out through beta testing for us to actually do internal releases. That's just full disclosure in that statement. What I have seen, however, and I have friends who have been in the startup space for years building these up. Elodine Tahun, shout out to you, my friend, University of Waterloo. Now you have AI analysts, right? And these AI analysts are not replacing L1, L2 analysts, but they're creating greater efficiency in processing of alerts, right? So now you can go through, let's say, God forbid, I hope you never make your team use ArcSight, but if you're using ArcSight and you have that waterfall alerting format, like oftentimes you miss a ton of alerts. And that creates like a lot of stress for organizations who are running security ops, especially for running in an MSP or MSSP where you have clients, you have SLA, and if you fuck up on an SLA, that costs a lot of money. You don't want to break SLA as a result of being overwhelmed by alert fatigue. AI then helps you deal with that alert fatigue because it processes through all the alerts in a fixed period of time and narrows down which are the ones that actually require substantive investigation. And then from an actual investigation standpoint, you're no longer manually having to go through and do the packet analysis. Now it can actually read the packets for you in certain offerings and certain tools and provide you with cogent single pane of glass results. A friend of mine, Ross Elliott, he actually recently said so. Ross is a brilliant business analyst for cybersecurity and for security in general. And I think he just got a new startup now too. He was formerly with Lima Charlie. But he said, you know, every single startup in security tries to position themselves as a single pane of glass. Unfortunately, most fail, but the ones that I've seen that use AI properly to solve analytic operation problems, they're the ones that actually achieve that success because they're the ones that you buy to make the lives of your analysts easier, not to replace them. And that's where I see it now. It's not that AI is necessarily replacing anyone, it's that it's making time and use more efficient for analyst teams, which is then creating greater security output and greater productivity. That's ultimately where I see AI playing in the cybersecurity space.
Well said. I want to switch gears a little bit because in your introduction, you talked about leadership, which I think is so critical. I have a saying, it's always management's fault, no matter what. Putting together a winning cybersecurity team, what's your recipe? What are you looking for? Let's say we're starting a new organization. You're the CISO. We've got to put together a world-class team. What are your best moves? Having seen that movie a few times now.
I think the biggest thing is you have to look at the personnel you have to start with, right? And it's a world of a difference if you're starting from absolute scratch, like you're the CISO and you got to build this team from no one, versus we've had these guys working in role for X amount of years or whatever, and they're generally handling security projects. They have a title, but they're not really doing that job. When I came in at Ruby, it was kind of that case. They were doing a lot of project-based security. And they had tools that they monitored, but they were spending way too much time delivering on projects or supporting on dev projects and actually doing security specific work. So the first thing I said was, okay, we're going to break down these teams into your function, right? So I had the SOC team only do SOC work. I had an AppSec team only do AppSec work, right? I had my architects only do architecture work. I used to have a projects team, which then just became threat intelligence and trust and safety. They did our additional projects that didn't have anything to do with the mainline work, but still supported. And because we have a B2C platform, we deal with a lot of fraud and we deal with a lot of trust and safety issues that impact customers. By breaking everything down, what I then was able to do was to figure out who are the right personality types for each role. But generally speaking, commonality, integrity is the biggest thing I look for. Work ethic, the ability to problem solve, your creativity, and the hidden magic in a world of neuroatypical, socially awkward people, social integration. Can you be a right fit for the team? Because you can teach anyone this tech stuff. Like, tech is not that hard, but teaching someone how to be a decent human being, finding someone who just knows how to lend a helping hand, and by default their instinct is to roll up their sleeves and get into it. Those are intangibles that you have to look for, because those are the things that when push comes to shove, when you're in that big incident or when you're trying to go through like your compliance auditing and things are getting tough and you're bogged in the mud, those are the guys and girls that are gonna really buckle down. And when the going gets tough, they get even tougher.
When nobody's looking.
Nobody's looking, right? There's no pride, there's no glory in it. You want to find the people that have personal pride in their performance and delivery, and they don't need to have a sunshine sprang on them every single time they walk out of their house. I was taught in security from the SIGINT world and in the cyber world. Security is a game of zeros and heroes, and most of the time we're going to be zeros. Every once in a while we get to be a hero, but most of the time we're either blamed for something that wasn't really our fault, or we're going to do the right thing and no one's going to notice it because we did the right thing. That's what you accept when you join a career in security.
I think that's a very good quote. I've never heard that one before. Zeros or heroes?
Yeah, it was actually my former MWO, who actually was one of the first guys out the door during Roto Zero in Afghanistan. And he was the SIG enter that was with that first operation that like went out in Op Canada.
Indeed, that was a zeros or heroes type of rollout. Quick question on remote work, hybrid, everyone in the office. You have any thoughts on that? It's a hot debate now.
Look, I work at a remote. Both my organizations are fully remote. Both my workforces are fully global, right? Multiple countries. I appreciate RTO. I appreciate RTO in certain types of organizations, in certain industries where you really should be there. But for the most part, I think what COVID showed us and what, the hybrid work or remote work era showed us is that we can still get a lot of work done with efficiency and productivity without having to drag people's personal lives every day and interrupt them to bring them to an office where they're miserable. Like the amount of times when RTO began again, which I think is really just a symptom of organizations that invested in real estate and then they had to go remote. And then people were like, oh, we can still do our jobs remotely. And then they didn't want to go back to the office because they didn't want to deal with the commute. And then you have these organizations that are holding the bag on this capex and real estate fees, and they have to justify it. And then also you have the other problem where bad leadership, bad culture, middle managers have to justify their existence, so they have to micromanage somebody because they don't actually deliver on anything. Because managing and performing in a remote configuration is a completely different skill set than existing and surviving and thriving in an office environment. I'm thankful for the time I got early in my career working in an office because I think it gave me a lot of important social skills and it taught me how to do a lot of things. And I enjoyed that sort of like high school, collegey atmosphere. But I think the leadership principles that we learned in the Army and at RMC, where we deal with a lot of virtual and wide deployed operations, those are the things that make us successful in a remote or hybrid hiding. I don't need like my SOC team to physically be in a brick and mortar SOC. Like it's cool if we can have one, but like I don't need that. We can run everything via the cloud. I don't need like all of my security functionality in one place at one time. And in fact, since we're a global company, because our customers are global and we run 24/7, I kind of prefer if I have people at least in every time zone. I think the nature of business has changed. I think people now, we know more better now. We're more educated about like corporate culture and toxicity. And we understand that, the quality of life of our personnel, if we can give them back an hour or two or more a day to be with their families, to be with their kids, to have happy, healthy lives, they're going to perform better for us. Why do I want to drag someone through a commute and then into an office just to go on another Zoom meeting on their computer in their cubicle, right? With people who are still deployed around the world. Why would I do that to someone? We're shooting ourselves in the foot. I am very much a big believer in remote work and in actual hybrid work in the sense that at least once every, 3 to 4 to 6 weeks, get together with your team physically if you can, or meet your clients, or meet your suppliers, or meet your partners. Like I am in Toronto every other week because I'm meeting with my suppliers and I'm meeting with my partners and I'm building relationships with my peers because those benefit myself and they benefit my organization. And business is still a game being run by humans. The handshake agreement is still powerful. But in a day-to-day level, most of the time, you never hear from me because I'm at home happily doing my job in my office, playing with my dogs.
Absolutely. I think well said also that all things being equal, it's always leadership, and probably it's harder to manage a team remotely to maintain a flow state and apply these principles without that obvious nonverbal communication and seeing people.
Well, I think, again, when we talk about the traditional leadership class in business, they're older. And a lot of them come from a time where they had to come up and dealing with the bullshit of office life. And so it's like when you saw in the Army, like you got a guy who is just an absolute piece of shit of a sergeant or a master jack or a captain in a training environment, and they're such a piece of shit because they got treated like shit when they were a cadet or they were a private, and they just repeat that cycle of abuse. I see this as a cycle of abuse almost, where it's like all these guys know is micromanaging their people and walking around an office as if they're some kind of general. I see modern leadership, younger leadership, guys of our generation who understand and are a little bit more intellectually open-minded. They're more educated.
Mm.
We see people on a human level a lot more clearly than, say, a lot more of the older, more traditional leadership types. So as guys like you and I really step up into our era of corporate leadership and command, I think the conversation becomes a lot different and our priorities become a lot more different.
You made me think of a couple stories for sure, maybe for another time. I wanna end on a maybe thinking about, your whole experience, which I think is very unique, and everything you've done so far. If you were to give yourself a piece of advice going back 10, 15 years, or maybe even to someone who's getting started in the industry, what would be your sort of top pearls of wisdom?
I have like two main pieces of advice. One is I got into cyber out of desperation to needing to pay my bills when my contracts dried up. So I got into it by accident based on having a friend that got me in. I wish I had done things with a little bit more intent. I live now with a sense of purpose. Like I live my entire career. You don't have to even talk to me to kind of see the direction I'm going in with my career, right? That was not always the case. I was just happy to make a paycheck. And I think if you end up in that position, and that a lot of people, they start paycheck to paycheck, they got to eat hand to mouth, and they just never break that. And they get stuck in these mid-tier cyber roles, and they don't really experience growth because they're too afraid to take the risks and to learn the new knowledges and to be uncomfortable enough to grow. So you have to have a purpose, have a goal. Where do you see yourself in 5 years, 10 years, and map out that path. Like I call it a mountaintop. I always review what is my mountaintop? What am I actually trying to achieve? Where am I right now? What steps do I need to conquer? What path do I have to take to get to my mountaintop? And when I get to my mountaintop, what's the next one? And then the other thing is a Stoic piece of advice. It's a Sun Tzu quote. When you are weak, look strong. When you are strong, look weak. By that, I mean, when you're starting out, you have to present yourself as someone who is capable of doing the job 1 to 2 levels up. You have to have that knowledge. You have to try to learn what the people beside you are doing. You have to try to learn and see your managers and see the senior analysts and the senior architects and, well, how do they do this thing? Why do they do it this way? How can I take lessons from that and apply it to my own work? How do I make myself a candidate worthy of being elevated to that level? And then when you get to the senior level, you have to stop your ego from being your biggest enemy. So you have to allow yourself to be humble. You can't sit there and act like you're the smartest one in the room. Because I swear to God, if I'm in a room and I legitimately feel like I'm the smartest person, I'm in the wrong room. I need to leave. I need to surround myself with people who inspire me, people who I aspire to be like, people who I can learn from. It goes into almost another lesson. Like you have to review and reflect who are the top 5 closest people in your life, personally and professionally. What value do they bring? And I don't mean like financial. I mean like what energy, what knowledge, how do they help you improve your life? And it doesn't mean direct coaching. Like I look at some of my friends who are brilliantly successful and I want to emulate them. And I have the opportunity because of our friendship to ask them, well, how did you overcome this? How did you figure this out? Where did you see this opportunity? And they'll share it with you because they're your friends and they love you. These are the types of people you need to surround yourself with. And this is the sense of purpose that you need to live your life and your career with if you're going to succeed in this game.
Well said. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much, George, for joining. If people want to follow up on what you're doing, I know you have a great podcast. Where can people follow you?
So my podcast, Bare Knuckles and Brass Tacks, it just won a SANS SANS Difference Maker Award in December. We are on Spotify. We're on Apple Pods. I'm available on LinkedIn as well. You can look me up and you can send me a message. As well, if you ever are looking for any kind of servicing directly from a consulting standpoint, contact me at Seba Law, gk@seba.law. I'm happy to take your requests and take your calls, and let's see if we can do business together.
Fantastic. Thank you, George.
Cheers, John.